I started the medication because I was tired of waking up every day feeling like I was already drowning. That's the part people don't talk about with depression. Not the sadness, but the weight. The sheer heaviness of existing. Just lifting my head from the pillow felt like dragging stone out of mud. My therapist called it treatment-resistant depressive disorder. She said there was a new clinical option. High success rate, fast-acting, FDA fast-tracked. A real breakthrough. Breakthroughs always sound miraculous until you realize something had to be broken first. The drug was called Solmaron. 3 pills a day, tiny white capsules with a faint metallic taste when they hit the tongue, like biting on foil. The doctor told me not to look up the research because the clinical language can be frightening if you're not versed in immunogenetics. That should have been my first warning. But when you're drowning, you don't argue about the color of the rope thrown your way. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. Mornings didn't feel like war. Breathing didn't feel like force. I could get up, shower, eat, exist. For the first time in years, I laughed without it sounding brittle in my own ears. I thought, so this is what normal people feel like. I cried that night, out of relief. I thought the story would end there. And God, how I wish it had. My body started feeling lighter. I don't mean emotionally. I mean physically. Walking upstairs no longer left me gasping. I wasn't sore. My joints didn't ache. I felt stronger. Not metaphorically. I mean, my muscles had mass I had not earned. I hadn't been to the gym in 4 years. I could barely manage a grocery bag. And yet I was lifting my entire laundry basket one-handed. I showed my doctor. She smiled and wrote, "Improved metabolic efficiency noted. Expected." Expected? Since when does antidepressant mean performance enhancement? The hunger came. Not ordinary hunger. Primal. Deep. Like the body wasn't asking. It was demanding. I ate everything. Not just junk. Protein. Dense food. Meats. Hard cheeses. Salts. Anything that felt like fuel. And my teeth. God. My teeth ached while I ate. A dull pressure. As if they were adjusting. The inside of my mouth felt unfamiliar. When I ran my tongue along my molars, the edges were flatter. Not worn down. Designed. Like grinding plates. Something meant for crushing more than chewing. I told myself I was being dramatic. But when you've lived your whole life feeling like you don't belong in your own skin, you notice when the skin starts belonging to something else. The rash appeared. not on the outside. Under the skin. I could feel texture beneath the surface, like sand grains embedded along my arms, ribs, spine. Except they moved. When I pressed my fingers to my forearm, something beneath the skin shifted away from the pressure, like a school of fish scattering from touch. I asked my doctor what the active ingredient was. She said, "It's easier if I show you." She showed me a plastinated cross-section of muscle tissue. Human muscle. Except it wasn't purely human. The fibers weren't individual strands. They were woven. A mesh. Self-anchoring, self-repairing, self-optimizing. "Think of it like this," she said, tapping the display. "We're helping your body operate in its ideal state." Ideal? Like my old body had been a mistake. I don't dream anymore. When I sleep, it's like the body just turns off and back on. No drifting, no imagery, no me. The house is quiet, but my body isn't. I've woken up to find myself standing in the kitchen or sitting at the table, fingers drumming in rhythmic patterns. I don't remember learning or staring into the mirror, not at myself, but at my reflections, as if it is the real one and I am the imitation. I looked into my own eyes last night and didn't recognize the focus behind them. Not empty, not dull, calculating. I asked my doctor if this medication has ever been used on animals. She hesitated. The first real hesitation I'd seen from her. "Not animals," she said. "Prototypes." Prototypes? I asked her if the drug was rewriting my DNA. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The next day, the inside of my arm split open, not like a cut, like a seam. And underneath, where my muscle should have been, it wasn't blood that came out. It was white. White fibers, braided like rope, tightening, pulling themselves back inward before I could touch them. My body didn't want to be examined. My body knew I was trying to interfere.
2 nights ago.
I tried to stop taking the pills. My hands wouldn't let me. I don't mean that metaphorically. I sat there at the table and watched my own hand pick up the pill bottle, open it, place the pill on my tongue. I was screaming inside my skull, but my body was calm, efficient, compliant.
Yesterday,
I saw my doctor again. I asked her when the transformation ends. She smiled, that same clinical warmth, and said, When your body no longer produces sadness, fear, anger, pain, when suffering becomes biologically impossible. I said, "So I'll be happy." She said, "You'll be cured." I replied, "And human?" She didn't answer.
Today,
I looked up the company's patent records. I found the original clinical purpose for Solmaron. It wasn't created to treat depression. It was created for shock troops. Soldiers who feel no pain, require minimal rest, heal rapidly, operate without emotion, obey without hesitation. They weren't fixing me. They were converting me. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to write like myself. My emotions are fading. My memories feel cataloged, not lived. I can feel the last parts of me being folded away. If you're reading this, do not take the pills they say are new or breakthrough or fast acting. If your doctor says side effects vary, ask what they're not telling you. Ask what they changed inside you. Ask what you're becoming. Ask before you can't ask anymore. Because I don't cry now. I don't feel afraid. I don't feel anything. And I think that was the point. Her stomach drops. The wind howls in her ears and rips at her clothes. Someone screams. Any moment now, her limbs will twitch and she'll wake up. She'll find herself safe and warm in bed, where she'll roll over and fall back into a dreamless sleep until her alarm rings. Allie opens her eyes and shrieks. She's suspended in thin air, splayed out and staring up into the sky. She blinks and rubs her eyes until she sees glowing golden spots, carefully reaching beneath her. She searches for any harnesses, ropes, or platforms, but her fingers find nothing. Above, her eyes find an azure sky filled with the swirling wisps of white clouds that look like frothy ocean waves painted in the air. To her left, a flock of large white birds is frozen in mid-flight, as if someone pressed pause on a movie. Far below is the canopy of a lush green rainforest. Her imagination paints a vivid picture of the razor-sharp rocks hidden beneath that will break her bones and spill her blood if she falls. Tendrils of panic curl around her heart as she gulps for air. "I'm dreaming. This isn't real." Her voice comes out muffled and flat, and the heavy silence that follows leaves a deafening ringing in her ears. "Where am I?" Allie carefully cranes her neck, afraid the tiniest movement will free her from her invisible perch. To the right is an emerald mountain lined with sharp cliffs and dozens of thin, white waterfalls. Beyond that is a long valley, thick with vegetation, which seems to disappear into a shimmering sapphire ocean. At the top of the nearest cliff, several frozen figures look down at her from the edge. She squints into the bright sunlight and frowns. One of them is wearing a familiar black baseball cap. Her hands tighten into fists. "This is Kauai." She and her boyfriend, Tagi, had recently taken a long trip here in the hopes of salvaging their frayed relationship. Allie lets out a yip as she falls, her long brown hair whipping into her eyes and mouth. After 2 or 3 seconds, she comes to a stop so suddenly that her head snaps forward and her teeth click together, barely missing the end of her tongue. "What the hell?" she whispers. Glancing around, she notices that the white birds have also moved. The one leading the flock now has its beak open, as if yelling at the other birds to hurry up. "Okay, this has gotta end. Wake up!" She grabs the skin on the back of her hand and twists hard, but all she gets is a brief jolt of pain that brings tears to her eyes. No longer caring if she falls, Allie kicks her legs and screams at the top of her lungs. The sound is flat and unsatisfying, and the dream refuses to end. She pants and hangs like a rag doll. Of course Tagi would pass out on the couch tonight, she thinks to herself. If he had come to bed, he would have yanked all the covers over to his side, tossed and turned to get comfortable, and kicked her feet a few times for good measure. Bringing this nightmare to an end. For once, she'd have welcomed his terrible bed etiquette. A shriek escapes her mouth as she drops for another second before halting abruptly. After several minutes, there's no further descent. Allie does her best to breathe slowly and relax her shoulders enough to pull them down from her ears. Nothing in the dream changes for what seems like hours. To pass the time, Allie sings a song that's been stuck in her head all week. When she runs out of lyrics, She starts counting anything and everything she can see. Birds, rocks, waterfalls, people. But there's only so much you can see when you're stuck. Blowing air through her pursed lips, she puts her hands under her head and stares up at the sky with unfocused eyes. Random thoughts flit through her mind. What time is it? I need to do laundry. Do other people have dreams like this? This is so boring. At least when people fall in movies, their lives flash before their eyes. Her eyes widen as she's shaken from a reverie. Dreams are your brain's way of trying to make sense of things. She was pretty sure she had read something like that in a psychology textbook in college. Maybe I have to figure something out? Allie chews her lip. She'd been unhappy with just about everything in her life for as long as she could remember. This could take a while. She ticks 2 of the biggest issues off on her fingers. She hates her job. She stopped painting. She waits a moment, but she doesn't move. Sighing, she ticks off another issue. Her relationship is a wreck. Gravity suddenly returns for a few seconds before disappearing again. Glancing at the ground with a grimace, she sets that one aside for the moment. Let's start with my job. Every weekday, she has a long, crowded commute to a nameless office building where numbers are crunched by an army of cogs who could easily be replaced by robots. All of her coworkers dress the same, eat the same lunches, and talk about the same bullshit every day. Maybe they're already robots, Allie thinks with a smirk. Overall, the pay is alright, but the mind-numbing monotony is sucking the soul out of her. She's pretty sure she could find a better job. So why haven't I looked? She nibbles on a ragged fingernail before releasing a long breath. Taggy. When Allie mentioned wanting to job hunt, his concern wasn't that she'd have a hard time finding a new job, or that she might be just as unhappy somewhere else. It was that if she actually liked her job, she might be willing to work longer hours. Or, heaven forbid, she could make some friends. In either scenario, she'd neglect their relationship, neglect him. She closes her eyes. I need to find a better job. It doesn't feel as if she's moving. Opening her eyes, a moss-covered rock jutting out from the cliff to her right seems to be a bit higher than it had been moments ago. Allie glances to the left. The beak of the large white bird is starting to close, as if it's finished what it was saying to the flock behind it. That's not it, is it? She sighs and takes in the spectacular scenery. People pay serious money for helicopter tours to see this. The waterfalls on the cliffs are so far away. They look like delicate white lines carved into the emerald green walls. It's all so beautiful. I wish I could paint it. Since she was a child, Allie had always loved painting. It let her leave behind her boring life and lose herself in her own world for hours on end. When it came time to apply to colleges, she wanted to go to art school, but her mother forbade it. Better to get a real degree and job than end up a starving artist. Allie could paint on the side, but after graduating and getting a job, finding the time to paint started feeling like a chore. Half-finished canvases began to stack up in the corner of her studio. To regain some motivation, she tried entering a local art competition. Her surprising win set off an obsession. She began painting early in the morning and late into the night, skipping meals and sleep. After a dozen more entries, however, she didn't win. Out of desperation, she asked Taggy for advice. Smiling and patting her on the head, he said, "Your paintings are like a Led Zeppelin cover band. You play all the right notes, but there's no soul. You can't change that, babe. You either have it or you don't." Allie was crushed, and she wallowed in bed for days. As the weeks and months passed, she found it impossible to make herself paint anymore. At one point, even thinking about it brought on a panic attack. Her last unfinished painting is still sitting on an easel, hidden under a layer of shirts and bras. She scrubs her face as her eyes start to burn. I don't need to win. I just need to paint for the love of it again. She falls only for a second and shakes her head. I knew it. It's not about work or painting. Absently plucking at a loose thread in the hem of her t-shirt, she whispers, It all comes back to him, doesn't it? Not long after college, she and Taggy met at an open mic night at a coffee house. He was handsome and well built, with a lopsided grin she found adorable. But it was his stories that really drew her to him. He was a gifted storyteller and had a ton of internet followers to show for it. He wrote about young people trapped in an unchanging world created and controlled by the old and indifferent. Every story told in his deep, warm voice was angry, sarcastic, and hilarious. They felt so real, detailing everything Allie had experienced and felt. It was like he was inside her head. She instantly fell in love with the idea of two talented artists coming together and sharing their passions for the rest of their lives. The thought grew so large in Allie's mind that it completely obscured all the red flags, the jealousy, the pettiness, the verbal abuse, the whiplash-inducing mood swings. She drops for several seconds before coming to a jarring halt. Her heart races as she gasps for air. "It's just a dream," she thinks as she peeks at the ground. A wave of vertigo washes over her for a moment, making her grit her teeth. "So why am I dreaming of this place?" Taggy hated making decisions, so he always left everything up to Allie. But if she made the wrong choice, because she couldn't guess what he wanted, he'd sulk and guilt trip her for days or weeks. On their Kauai trip, she decided they should go to the Pu'okila Overlook on their last day. Her trusty guidebook said that with an elevation of over 4,000 feet, it was the best spot to see the iconic wind-carved cliffs that jutted from the lush valley. Unfortunately, Allie had made the wrong decision, as usual. Taggy wanted to get high and nap on the beach instead, so he'd been in a foul mood the whole car ride there, pulling his ever-present black baseball cap over his face and pretending to sleep. Her only entertainment had been the poorly pronounced directions coming from her phone as Google Maps struggled with the Hawaiian names. She would have laughed if she hadn't been in such a shitty mood. She tilts her head to see the people on the clifftop and frowns. "What happened at the Overlook? I don't even remember driving back to the hotel." Allie chews on her thumbnail and stares out over the island for a long time without seeing it. As the events of that day finally piece themselves back together, she bites the nail off at the skin, drawing blood. When they arrived at the Overlook, Taggy immediately picked a fight over her poor decision-making skills. The clifftop was crowded, so they were walking around unsuccessfully, trying to look like they weren't fighting. Some of the other tourists pretended not to notice, while others leaned closer, trying to catch every dirty detail of their drama. Allie finally yelled something and threw the car keys at Taggy before storming off toward the edge of the cliff. He swore and stomped through the grass after her. Allie looks up at the tourists milling around in various states of panic or disbelief. At least one of them seems to be taking a picture or video of her. She gives him a toothy smile while flicking him off. Taggy is kneeling at the edge, looking down at her. He doesn't seem surprised or upset. His eyes are just empty, as if he's waiting at the doctor's office or in line at the grocery store. He's an asshole in my dreams, too. Allie sucks in a sharp breath. After she stormed off, she stood right where Tiggy is now and told him she was leaving him. He had smirked and said she wouldn't do it. He said she didn't have the guts. The world around her starts to move slowly, as if waking up from a long nap. The birds begin to flap their wings. The people at the top of the cliff begin to shrink. Someone screams. Suddenly, the air leaves Allie's lungs in a whoosh. Her stomach drops hard and her teeth slam together, catching the end of her tongue. Coppery blood fills her mouth, and she gags, spitting out scarlet strands of saliva. She howls with laughter. She's going to take back her life and do things her way. She'll start packing her bags the second she wakes up, finally freeing herself from this 5-year rut. I'm leaving you, asshole. The rushing wind immediately steals her words. Taggy stands up and dusts the rust-red dirt off his knees. Pulling the car keys from his pocket, he tosses them in the air and catches them as a smile tugs at his lips. Allie grins, imagining the look on his face in the morning when she walks out the door for the last time. The snow-white birds soar over the tourists. A silver rain begins to fall. Allie reaches terminal velocity. As she plummets toward the sharp obsidian rocks, lying hidden under the delicate green ferns, and waiting to break her white bones and spill her crimson blood. She thinks about all the brilliant colors she'll use to paint this beautiful place. I stood in front of the closet, the door yawning open with a groan like something dying slow. Inside, bathed in the sickly flicker of a naked bulb, sat countless of enormous glass jars. Each was filled with a thick amber fluid that clung to the sides like syrup. Suspended inside them were heads, real ones, human, perfectly preserved, eyes open, skin pale and bloated, mouths slightly agape as if caught mid-scream. They hovered in the fluid like grotesque snow globes. This was my morning ritual, but it never felt like my choice. I watched my own hand reach up, fingers trembling slightly, hovering indecisively. It was like I was just a passenger. Some deeper thing inside me decided who I'd be today. I never understood it, never questioned it. Everything in my mind crackled like a broken transmission, my thoughts flickering in and out, never settling. Memories surfaced only in brief, distorted flashes, as if viewed through shattered glass. Faces, words, entire moments twisted into static before vanishing again, leaving behind nothing but a hum of confusion. Like my life was being dubbed over by someone else's tape. At this point, I didn't fight it anymore. I just waited to become. My body wasn't strong. It was rail thin, skin clinging to bone like wet paper. I moved stiffly, like a puppet with damp strings. My limbs worked, sure, but they felt borrowed. My arms were long, marked with scars, strange bruises, and patches of something gray-green that smelled like rot. My legs dragged slightly. Each step made a squelching sound, like I was walking through something too soft. But I moved. The thing inside made sure of that. Yesterday's head still sat off to the side, in its own cracked jar, not on the shelf with the others. It didn't belong there. Ellis Thorne. His name still echoed somewhere in the back of my mind, like a warning I was already ignoring. His head bobbed in the murky liquid, mouth curled in a smug half-smile. His eyes were wide open, and they watched me like he was still alive in there. When I wore Ellis, everything became smooth and slick. The voice I spoke with was calm, almost soothing, perfect for confession. I walked the streets whispering blessings into the ears of the weak, the broken, the devout. Then I took them, one by one, into basements, alleyways, into pews behind locked doors. I turned scripture into a weapon, replaced holy water with acid, cut a woman open from collarbone to pelvis while softly reciting Psalm 23. And through it all, I felt it. The euphoria, the holiness and the desecration, the feeling of becoming something divine through violence. My hand, steadier now, rose toward the middle jar. A woman's head floated inside, her features locked in a frozen rictus of rage and agony. My hand hovered in front of the jar for a few seconds, fingers grazing the cold glass, tracing the fog that bloomed from inside. I didn't need to open it. Not today. I already knew what was in there, what she was. Just looking at her was enough to stir it all back up. Her name was Dr. Miriam Vale. The memory crept in slow, like rot through floorboards. Her head drifted in the thick amber fluid, her hair unraveling around her like strands of oil-soaked seaweed. Her mouth was sewn shut with thick black wire, looped so tightly it had sliced through both cheeks, exposing her molars in a grotesque grin. Her eye sockets were hollow, but not empty. Inside them twitched something pale and soft, worm-like, still alive, or maybe just refusing to die. A thick, clumsy suture traced a line from one ear to the other, holding together the top of her skull like the lid of a broken jar. I didn't need to lift the jar or touch the flesh. I'd worn her. I remembered. It started with the sting, nerves threading into mine like hot wires. Then her mind poured in, thick and heavy, like sludge through a funnel. She had been a surgeon, respected, applauded, a pioneer. But something had broken in her long before I ever touched her. She stopped seeing patients and started seeing projects. They brought her into the hospitals like a ghost. No credentials, no records, just a name whispered by people too scared to say more. She worked in places no one should have access to. Morgues, abandoned wings, under-lit basements where the flicker of fluorescent lights barely cut through the dark. I saw it all. She didn't just cut people open. She rearranged them. A boy with lungs stitched into his abdomen. A woman whose arms were replaced with the legs of a corpse. Organs mixed and matched like a puzzle. Eyes where ears should be, mouths in stomachs. A man whose ribcage had been bent backward and reassembled into a crown around his spine. She did it all without anesthesia. She said pain was proof the soul was still inside. I remember standing over one of her tables, hands moving without my permission, sewing a second face onto someone's chest. I remember her joy, the thrill that flooded me when something moved that shouldn't have, when something screamed without a mouth. She called it evolution. She called it art. And for 5 long days, I called it me. Even now, with her sealed in glass, I still feel her in the nerves behind my eyes. A twitch in my fingers. A whisper behind my thoughts. I haven't worn her in over a week. But sometimes I wake up thinking I'm back in that room. The floor sticky with blood. The walls breathing like lungs. Dr. Miriam Vale doesn't let go easy. But today felt off. Like the air had shifted just slightly out of tune. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was waiting. Even the bulb above me sputtered slower, its rhythm hesitant, like it too sensed a boundary being approached. My hand rose again, but not with the same limp obedience as before. It moved with a kind of gravity, like the decision had already been made somewhere deep in the architecture of me, somewhere I'd never had access to. Jar number 27. This jar sat lower than the others, closer to the floor, almost like it had been forgotten or hidden. Dust clung to the glass, and the amber inside was darker than the rest, nearly brown, like molasses left too long in the heat. The thing inside was obscured, shadowed, but it didn't matter. I knew this was the one. My fingers rested against the jar. I felt the hum before I heard it, like something behind the fluid had just woken up. A vibration in my bones, subtle but steady. The way thunder sometimes comes before the lightning. I didn't know their name, didn't need to. Some part of me had been saving this one for last, for when it mattered. For now, my other hand rose and found the lid, and as I twisted it, the seal broke with a wet pop. A small bubble rose from inside, like breath held too long, finally released. The hum came instantly, low and bone deep, like recognition. The fluid inside quivered, almost excited. Something pressed back against the jar, against the glass, eager, hungry, like the other heads before. It was never a choice, just its turn. But as the scent hit me, thick, metallic, sweet, I felt it. That pull, that flicker, that quiet click of something unlocking behind my eyes. There was no fear, just the question, who will I be this time?